Okay, so I want to talk about the technology of flow. And there's a couple of ways that we can look at it. We can look at this from a spiritual point of view, where before it was termed as flow, people would call it ecstasy. And it was a state which people entered when they were in deep worship, when they were in, composing or performing music, when they're in creative art mode, that type of feeling where you're just in the zone. I could talk about it from a neuroscience point of view, where we're talking about electrochemicals and bio neurochemistry and things like that. And that's fine too. But we're not going to go too much into that right now. I want to look at it more in a holistic point of view, because when you understand the elements from a systemic point of view, what it does, it empowers you. It gives you the ability to be able to know whereabouts you are in the system and how to navigate. Then you can start including the esoteric elements, the evidence-based elements into it to enhance that. All right. So to give you an explanation of flow, I'm going to give you my system, which I've spent a lot of time thinking about and working on. And I want to share it with you. And this is the first time I'm actually sharing it with the world as it is today. All right. I'm going to first give a shout out because I acknowledge my sources. And I want to acknowledge Bawa and Dinesh, who are teachers in India, and they teach meditation, okay, from a very grounded, very practical perspective. And this was, based on some of the teachings that I got from them um, many, many years ago. And I've since cultivated it, refined it, and given it a whole new perspective when it comes to applying it to the state of flow. All right. So with that, let's jump into it. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I'll share my iPad. Here we go. And that's just coming on screen right now. All right. So there are three elements. Okay. There are three elements. Number one, we have what we call resistance. Number two is what we call effort. And number three is what we call harmony. Now, in case you don't remember, I'm going to give you easy ways to remember it. Okay. The way to remember it this way, then, through alliteration, is we've got friction, we've got force, and we've got, you're going to say flow, but I'm going to say fluency. Okay. I'm saying fluency because fluency is about mastery. Okay. Fluency is like when you're fluent in a language, for example, right? I'm very fluent in it. When you're fluent in life, you've got command and mastery over it. Okay. Harmony means that it moves nice and smooth. It flows, correct? Yeah. Fluency is also about flow. The reason I want to stay away from flow is because all of these three in combination actually combine to give you flow. But also, flow in itself, in and of itself, is restrictive. It actually is in the domain over here. Okay. So it's in the domain of effort or force. And when you're got that in the right place with the right amount of friction, then you're supposed to be in a state of flow. But flow is not sustainable. And this is what I want to say to you. Flow is only meant for short periods of time. Harmony is that next level. It's where it's sustainable on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis. Too much flow can lead to a state called hypermania. It's where you feel bulletproof. And I've been in that state too many times, so I know this pretty well. When you're in a state of hypermania, you feel bulletproof, unstoppable, and you start taking on more than what you can chew. And when you're in that state where you start taking on more than what you can chew, you build yourself up for burning up and burning out and burning through. And that's what happens, right? When you have to apply too much effort, because you come out of that flow and then you realize you've taken on too much and you start fighting, you start hustling. The idea is to get you out of hustle. Flow is good for short periods of time. I'm going to talk about harmony, which is a sustained state of flow, which is almost spiritual. All right. So let's talk about this a bit more. Let's talk about resistance. Okay. I like to refer to resistance as a downward spiral. And for that one, I'm going to use the red. Okay. So let's talk about resistance. Okay. Resistance is red. And you might talk about it as friction. And it's a good term for that, friction. Okay. But when we're talking about resistance, you do need resistance. Okay. And it's beneficial for you. You do need some resistance. I'll tell you why. Because what resistance allows you to do, it allows for rest. Okay. It allows for sleep and recovery. It gives you traction and stability because you need a little bit of friction, that resistance to get traction. Otherwise, you're just slipping and sliding everywhere. It gives you, when you have resistance there, you feel the challenge. And challenge is what motivates high performers to actually want to grow. And in the space of friction where there's challenge, it boosts your creativity. So it is necessary. You do need some amounts of it. But here's what happens, right? At a low stage, you do have all of this stuff. When it gets moderate, you hit an area called stagnation. And this is where procrastination, apathy, confusion, they all tend to be prominent. It can get into confusion and negligence and that feeling of being stuck. What ends up happening, right, is you're going in what I'd like to call a downward spiral. So you start going down like this, right? And it gets more and more amplified as you go down. Okay, it's a downward spiral. You're going down because as you go further and further down, it's a negative feedback loop. You go from procrastinating, you go from apathy, confusion, negligence, feeling stuck. Yeah. If it gets to be high levels of friction or high levels of resistance, you start feeling depressed, indifferent. You become self-destructive, right? This is where all your progress starts grinding to a halt and everything becomes a grind. Okay. So at low levels, you get sleep, you get recovery, you get traction, you get stability, you get challenged, but you also get creative. The problem is that we don't stop there, right? Sometimes what ends up happening is you start procrastinating. We've all procrastinated. You start getting apathetic, right? And as that descent happens, we tend to lose control. So the problem is not that we use minimal amounts of it. The problem is that we tend to ride this downward spiral that I've highlighted over here. We tend to go downwards into states of self-destruction. So on the other side, we've got effort, right? I'm going to put effort as an amber color, right? This orangey color, like a traffic light. Okay. Effort, what I call force, because that's what it is. It's movement. Okay. It's movement. Now, bring up a blank page over here. Here's what it tends to be. We all need movement, right? It's action. It gives you action. It gives you drive. It gives you excitement and passion, right? What it gives you is that activation energy, which then creates motivation, which then creates discipline, right? That's what we want. And at low levels, right, you've got drive. That's what we want. What happens though at moderate levels of effort or force, you've got intensity and things start getting frenetic. You start getting restless, anxieties, you start getting cravings, right? Agitations and dissatisfactions and senses of greed sometimes creep in. At high levels of effort, things become chaotic. You have chaos. You've got obsession, burnout, conflict, and your destructive tendencies tend to be externalized towards others in anger, frustrations, and things like that. Right. And it leads to hustle, endless action, instability, eventually burnout, right? Now, what this looks like, it looks like you are in a spiral. Oops, use a better pen there. You're in a spiral, but it's like you're just chasing yourself. And yes, there might be growth, but sometimes it tends to come in on itself and it's just this big chaotic spiral. Okay. It's like you're chasing your tail. That's exactly what it is. You are chasing your tail. And yes, it's the same level, but different level because you're going in an outward spiral and sometimes you come back in. That's normal, right? But what ends up happening is that when you get into that hustle and you start thriving on adrenaline and cortisol, it becomes addictive, right? And unfortunately, extended periods of flow lead to this, right? Extended periods of flow lead to you chasing your tail because it becomes endless action. It becomes hustle. And I remember I was at a point in my life where all I knew was how to hustle and I burnt myself out multiple times. Let's look at this third element over here. Okay. Let's look at this third element over here. And rightly so, I'm going to use green. Okay. Harmony or fluency. Oops, where did I just do that? Right. Harmony or fluency. Now, when you're looking at harmony or fluency, you've got to think of it this way. At low levels, you experience a sense of calm. You get clarity, peace, focus, right? You, as I said, you got this calm. It's centered, it's smooth. You're in the zone, but it's almost effortless, right? Unlike here, where we're talking about force and effort, this is effortless, right? This is the effortless flow that people aspire to have. And that's at low levels of harmony, right? At moderate levels, you're experiencing harmony in a whole different state. It's a sustained positive state. You feel wisdom, compassion, joy, equanimity, insight. Yeah, that's what you're getting. At high levels of harmony, you're experiencing what the mystics would call bliss, right? It's a sense of enlightenment, knowledge, freedom, that self awareness, that consciousness. It's almost like luck is on your side. Things are happening, right? For you, not to you. And what ends up happening is that you start this way. It's also a spiral. Everything you notice is in a spiral, but you start off, oops, you start off with a little bit of a spiral. And then what ends up happening, it starts avalanching, has a snowball effect, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay. And what ends up happening is the higher you got the spiral, the bigger it gets. As you guys can tell, graphic design is not one of my biggest skills, but I hope you're getting the point here. In fact, I'm going to try and draw this again for you one more time. Okay. Third time lucky. Here we go. So you start off small and you keep expanding, and the spiral gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So it's meant to be like a conical shape. And that's basically what it is. You start feeling happier. You start feeling more peaceful. You start feeling more bliss. You start feeling more calm and more centered. All right. As I said, equanimity is there. So the technology of flow, and these are the pillars, these are the elements of flow. The technology of flow is very, very simple. Okay. You've got three elements. And the idea is that we use these three elements. Here's what you need to think about, right? You want to give yourself harmony. You also do need, right, resistance. And you also need force, effort, which, as I mentioned, is force, right, to help you remember it, friction, and fluency. So here's basically what you're going to do. You want to reduce resistance to its bare minimum. You want to reduce effort to its bare minimum. But simultaneously, you want to increase harmony as much as you possibly can. Okay. That is really the way that you want to do this. Now, there's many multiple ways that you can do this, right? Part of it, okay, part of it comes through, and now this is where I'm going to use the white again. It comes down to nourishment and nutrition, right? So what you eat. Okay, so I'm going to put it down as nutrition. Part of it is community. Okay, there's another part of it is about attitudes. And with that, we're talking about thinking. And finally, habits, actions. See, you could look at it this way. If you want more harmony, you have to do things that give you more harmony, right? The food that you need to eat needs to be balanced, right? I'll give you an example of how food affects you, right? If you drink copious amounts of alcohol, right? If you drink copious amounts of alcohol, you're going to experience over here more of this. I'm going to use yellow. More resistance, more frictions. You start slowing down, right? If you have copious amounts of coffee, you're going to experience more of this. So, what's something that will give you more harmony, right? Increase your hydration, for example. Have electrolytes, yeah? Things like that will actually increase your harmony, okay? Reduce the amount of alcohol you have, reduce the amount of coffee you have. Don't drown yourself in alcohol, right? To unwind at night so that you can sleep better, and then pump yourself full of coffee in the morning and have 6 cups of coffee just to keep you going. That's destructive. Yeah, that's destructive. Yes, it might get you in the flow in that moment. Long term, none of that stuff's healthy for you. Drinking water, however, drinking electrolytes, that's fantastic for you. Yeah. That's what we're talking about nutrition. The same as foods. You know what they say, you are what you eat. Yes, it manifests, right? It presents itself, it materializes in your life. Okay. Let's have a look at that. So, your food side, right? You want to make sure that your nutrition, and that's also your environment. And that's the fifth one, right? Oh, sorry, it's not actually the fifth one. It's actually over here, community, and also mean environment. Oops. The people you hang about with, you've heard that saying, you are the sum of the 5 people that you're closest with, right? You are the sum, your results in life reflect the sum of the 5 people that you are closest with. So you hang around with people who are lazy, you hang around with people who are overly, you know, depressed, apathetic, procrastinators. Well, guess what? You're gonna have more of this. Conversely, you hang around with hustlers, right? What's gonna happen? You're gonna start acting like them. Here's what you're gonna find: people who are in chronic states of resistance, where we're talking about depression, indifference, apathy, confusion, they tend to have addictive habits of their own. They tend to have addictive habits which give them quick dopamine hits, right? Because they just want to feel good in the moment. So they tend to overeat, right? They tend to indulge themselves and binge. Yeah. People who are in states of effort, they also have the desire for quick dopamine hits, but they have more stimulants. They're going to be going out and having lots and lots of coffee. There's nothing wrong with coffee. I love my coffee too, right? But they're also going to be the people that are more likely to be stimulated by harder, stimulating drugs and substances, right? That I know from my days in recruitment, people that I used to work with would give themselves stimulants like speed, like cocaine, like heroin to keep themselves going, right? The heroin would make them feel blissed out, but they would take things like speed and things like that to keep themselves going. That's basically what they would do. So drugs, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. I'm not the expert on drugs, right? But they will take substances which give them high amounts of stimulation. Okay. If you hang around people who are in a state of harmony or constantly experience equanimity, okay, they're equanimous in the way that they act. They're balanced. Yeah, they're balanced. They're positive. They're compassionate. They're joyful. they're eating healthy, they're working their body, they're getting enough rest, chances are you're going to do the same. That's why community matters. Okay. The people you're around matter. If you're watching TV all day and all you've got is the news and the news is constantly negative, guess what? You're going to be agitated, right? Anxiety, agitation, all a sign of increased levels of effort. Okay. Your mind's constantly working on overdrive. Okay. And that's taking us a good little segue into things like attitudes and thinking. Okay. If you think procrastination, think of putting things off rather than doing things at the time, I'm not talking about urgency. I'm talking about just doing it as it comes up, as it's necessary. If you keep putting things off, if you're constantly procrastinating, if you're constantly like, I can't be bothered, I'm looking for the easiest route rather than becoming the better person, then you're in a state of resistance to your own life, right? That attitude, that thinking that I can't be screwed, I don't give a shit, can't be fucked, that's all resistance, right? Conversely, if you're thinking and your attitude is around hustle, hustle, never enough, I'm not enough, I want more, I need more, more, then you're in that state of effort constantly. You're constantly forcing. Okay. But if you're in a state of acceptance, acceptance is not about abdication. That's not what I'm talking about. This is abdication. Okay. Abdication lives in the realm of resistance, right? If you're in like, I can accept it, great. The weather's wet. I can't, or I won't go out for a run because it's wet and it's cold. Instead, I'm going to accept that. I'm not going to whinge and moan about it. I'm going to be at home and I'm going to do my push-ups. I'll be taking a skipping rope and doing skipping. Right? That's acceptance, right? Resistance would be, oh, it's raining outside. I ain't going out for my exercise. Effort would be, screw that, right? I'm going to go out there and I'm going to run. I'm going to go in my singlet shirt and my running shorts, and I'm going to come back soaked. And you know what? That's what I do. That's Dave Goggins style, right? Love Dave Goggins. Don't always believe everything he says, but he's great. He's got some great stuff there, and clearly very successful guy. But I don't think that works for everyone. Okay, so attitudes, right? You're around people that accept, people who own their stuff, people who say, I can make this happen, I can make that happen, I will make it happen because I choose to make it happen. As opposed to, this is too hard, hustle harder, push harder, work until midnight. That hustle culture doesn't work. But also, neither does abdication, neither does I. Screw it, I'll bury my head in the sand. Finally, last one, habits, your actions. The way you act, right? The way you speak. Look at the language you're using. Okay. If you're acting with scarcity, if your habit's always around scarcity, then you're actually here. Okay. That scarce mindset is symbolic because scarcity also is paired with greed, cravings. That's here. Yeah. That's effort focus. That's force focus. If you are, however, apathetic, right? If you can't be bothered, if you're cluttered, right? If you're disorganized, if you're a hoarder, right? If you let things go to waste, like food, you buy all this food, you spend all this money on food, and then it just stays in the fridge while you go out and eat. Well, bad habit. That's resistance. You're resisting cooking, resisting using the good food. If you're just like constantly going out there and eating chocolate bars and chips, drinking Coke, you can say, yes, I'm a vegan, but guess what? You're not eating healthy foods. You're still resisting, right? If you're constantly talking about and acting about how stuck you are, how much your business is not moving, but you don't do anything about it, you're in resistance mode, right? The opposite of hustle. If you're hustling all the time, that's what's going to lead to a lack of harmony. Okay. So I've got that. However, strong rules for yourself strong boundaries with other people, enforcing them, maintaining them, speaking with compassion, speaking equally balanced, owning your stuff, and speaking with responsibility, harmony. So what do we want to do? Increase harmony, reduce resistance, and reduce effort. And that is what's going to be sustainable for you. That's going to be sustainable. Now, that's sustainable high performance. Yeah? That's basically what we're talking about here, sustainable high performance. The way you do that is by mastering the technology of flow, is by understanding how it works. If you find yourself resisting, then you need to minimize resistance. If you find yourself hustling, then you need to minimize the hustle and increase that feeling of harmony, mastery, fluency. All right. So I'll take this off screen now and just explain to you. This is just giving you an understanding, an overview. Engaging in practices like breath work, meditation, going out in fresh air, sunshine, all that stuff is all conducive to you increasing levels of harmony, eating clean, good foods, all right? Balanced foods, higher in protein, right? That's all going to be helpful for you. Okay, if you're eating junk foods, eating high carbohydrates, stimulating yourself on coffee, well, then again, that's not going to help you out at all. So in order to eat the right nutrition, I've got more of these conversations that I have inside our WhatsApp group. It's called the Energetic Edge. Okay, if you're interested, the links to the Energetic Edge are going to be in the notes of this video, and you're welcome to join. All right. Sorry, I just called it the Energetic Edge. It's not the Energetic Edge. It's Business Performance Insiders. Energetic Edge is a different group that I've got. It's called Business Performance Insiders. So if you're interested in improving your business, I'll invite you along to come and join the conversation. It's free. There's no fees for it. It's just a bunch of like-minded people where we're looking to engage the technology of flow, where we have these conversations where we can answer your questions. And it's a bunch of other people, like-minded people like you, who want to perform at a better level, want to have peace and harmony in their business, their personal lives, but also the relationships they have. We cover all of that. I encourage you to join Business Performance Insiders. If you do want to know about the Energetic Edge, have a chat with me about that too. But in the meantime, the link to Business Performance Insiders is in the notes, and I look forward to seeing you there. Bye for now.